I never thought my life would change because of a bowl of soup. My name is Marcus Chen, and until 3 months ago, I was just another face in the corporate cafeteria kitchen at Meridian Technologies. Every morning at 5 a.m., I'd arrive at the gleaming headquarters in downtown Seattle, put on my apron, and prepare meals for executives who earned more in a week than I made in a year. That Tuesday started like any other. The autumn rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows as I prepped ingredients for the lunch service. Meridian Technologies was buzzing with unusual energy. Rumor had it that CEO Jonathan Whitfield was about to announce the biggest deal in company history. A $2.8 billion merger with Technova Industries that would make Meridian the largest software development firm on the West Coast. I was chopping vegetables when I overheard 2 senior executives discussing numbers at their usual corner table. My English wasn't perfect. I'd immigrated from Taiwan 5 years earlier, but I understood enough to catch fragments of their conversation. They were talking about stock prices, market projections, and something about the final calculation being off. What caught my attention wasn't their words, but their tone. Panic. Pure, undiluted panic. As I served their lunch, I couldn't help but notice the documents spread across their table. Financial projections, merger agreements, and what looked like calculation sheets covered in red corrections. My background in accounting from my university days in Taipei kicked in automatically. Even upside down, I could see the numbers, and something was terribly wrong. The executives left abruptly, forgetting their documents in their haste. I should have called security immediately, but curiosity got the better of me. I glanced around the empty cafeteria and took a closer look at the papers. That's when I saw it, a miscalculation so massive it took my breath away. Someone had moved a decimal point in the merger evaluation. Instead of $280 million in projected savings, the documents showed $2.8 billion. The entire deal was based on a mathematical error that would cost Meridian everything. My hands trembled as I realized the magnitude of what I was seeing. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a company-ending catastrophe waiting to happen. The merger was scheduled to be announced in less than 2 hours, and thousands of jobs, including mine, hung in the balance. I had to make a choice that would define the rest of my life. Standing in that empty cafeteria, surrounded by the smell of cooling soup and the weight of a $100 million mistake, I faced the most difficult decision of my life. Who was I to question the calculations of Harvard MBAs and Wall Street analysts? I was just a cook who happened to have an accounting degree from a university most Americans had never heard of. But the numbers didn't lie. I'd spent countless hours during my university years working through complex financial models, and this error was glaring once you knew what to look for. The merger valuation had inflated Technova's worth by exactly 1 decimal place, a simple but catastrophic mistake that would bankrupt Meridian within 6 months of the deal's completion. My first instinct was to return the documents to the executives' table and pretend I'd never seen them. After all, what business did an immigrant cook have interfering with billion-dollar corporate decisions? I'd worked too hard to get my green card and establish a life in America to risk it all now. But then I thought about my coworkers in the kitchen, Maria, who was saving money to bring her children from El Salvador, James, the dishwasher who was putting himself through community college, Susan, the head chef who'd taken a chance on me when no one else would. If Meridian collapsed, we'd all lose our jobs, and people like us don't bounce back easily from financial disasters. I made copies of the key documents using the cafeteria's administrative printer, my heart pounding with each page that emerged. Then I carefully returned the originals to exactly where the executives had left them. I had 1 hour before the board meeting where Jonathan Whitfield would present the merger to Meridian's shareholders. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt like an eternity. Meridian's executive offices occupied the entire top floor, a world of polished marble and oil paintings that I'd only seen during late-night cleaning shifts. The reception area was bustling with board members, investment bankers, and lawyers, all preparing for what they believed would be the most successful announcement in company history. I approached the receptionist, a stern woman in her 50s who looked at me with obvious confusion. "I need to speak with Mr. Whitfield immediately," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about the merger." She glanced at my cafeteria uniform and raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Whitfield is in final preparations. If you have a catering issue, you'll need to speak with. Ma'am, I interrupted, something I'd never done in my 5 years at Meridian. There's an error in the merger calculations. A $100 million error. Mr. Whitfield needs to see this before the announcement. The skepticism in her eyes was unmistakable, but something in my tone must have convinced her to make the call. Jonathan Whitfield was exactly what you'd expect from a billionaire CEO. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of commanding presence that made boardrooms fall silent. When I entered his corner office, he was reviewing his presentation notes, completely absorbed in what he believed would be his greatest corporate triumph. "You have 3 minutes," he said without looking up. "Sarah tells me you're concerned about the merger calculations." I placed the copied documents on his mahogany desk, my hands surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Mr. Whitfield, I believe there's been a decimal point error in the Technova valuation. The projected savings are showing as $2.8 billion, but based on the underlying data, it should be $280 million. He finally looked up, his steel-gray eyes studying me with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "And you are Marcus Chen, sir. I work in the cafeteria, but I have an accounting degree from National Taiwan University." I noticed the discrepancy when the executives left their documents in the dining area. Whitfield's expression shifted from annoyance to something resembling curiosity. He picked up the documents and began scanning them with the rapid eye movements of someone accustomed to digesting complex financial information. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. "Show me," he said finally. For the next 20 minutes, I walked him through the calculations, pointing out how the error had propagated through multiple worksheets. Whitfield asked sharp, probing questions that tested not just my mathematical skills but my understanding of corporate finance. Despite my nervousness, I found myself falling into the rhythm of problem-solving that had served me well in my university days. His face grew paler with each explanation. This wasn't just a simple error, it was a fundamental miscalculation that would have destroyed Meridian's cash flow and left the company vulnerable to bankruptcy. The merger, which should have been a minor acquisition, had been presented as a transformative deal that would triple the company's value. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, sinking back into his chair. "We're 15 minutes away from announcing this to the world." I watched as one of the most powerful men in the tech industry grappled with the reality that his company had come within minutes of financial suicide. The board members were waiting downstairs, shareholders were expecting the announcement, and media outlets were preparing to broadcast what they thought would be the biggest business story of the year. Whitfield reached for his phone and made a series of rapid calls, canceling the announcement and summoning his financial team for an emergency meeting. As I prepared to leave, he held up a hand. "Mr. Chen, I want you to stay. I need someone I can trust to verify these calculations, and right now, you're the only person in this building who's proven their competence today." The next 4 hours were a whirlwind of emergency meetings, frantic phone calls, and damage control. Whitfield's financial team, the same executives I'd served lunch to earlier, sat ashen-faced around the conference table as the magnitude of their error became clear. The merger had to be restructured completely, with Technova's actual value being roughly 1/10 of what they'd calculated. I found myself in the surreal position of explaining complex financial concepts to people who earned 50 times my salary. Despite their initial skepticism and barely concealed resentment at being corrected by a cafeteria worker, the numbers spoke for themselves. The error was undeniable, and my analysis was flawless. During a brief break, Whitfield pulled me aside. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want a completely honest answer. Why did you bring this to me? You could have easily ignored it, kept your head down, and continued your job. Why risk everything?" I thought about his question carefully. "Mr. Whitfield, I've spent 5 years watching this company operate. I've seen the dedication of the employees, the innovation in the products, the positive impact Meridian has on the community. This error would have destroyed all of that. I couldn't live with myself knowing I had the power to prevent it and chose not to act." Something shifted in his expression. "Tell me about your background. Your real background, not just your job here. I shared my story, how I'd been a senior analyst at a financial firm in Taipei before immigrating to America, how language barriers and credential recognition issues had forced me to take whatever work I could find, how I'd been slowly rebuilding my career while supporting my family back home. I'd never told anyone at Meridian about my previous life, partly from pride and partly from fear that it would create unrealistic expectations. "My God," he said quietly. "We've had a financial expert working in our cafeteria for 5 years, and nobody knew." The investigation that followed revealed the scope of the problem. The decimal point error had been compounded by a series of smaller mistakes, creating a cascade of miscalculations that had somehow passed through multiple layers of review. The lead analyst responsible for the merger evaluation had been overwhelmed by the complexity of the deal and had made a fundamental error in his spreadsheet formulas. By evening, the crisis had been contained. The merger was postponed indefinitely. Technova's executives were furious but couldn't argue with the mathematics, and Meridian's stock price had actually risen slightly due to rumors that the company had avoided a major financial misstep. As the emergency meetings wound down, Whitfield asked me to stay behind one more time. The office was quiet now, the urgency of the crisis replaced by the calm that follows a near disaster. "Marcus, I owe you more than I can possibly express. You saved this company, and you saved my career. But I have a feeling this is just the beginning of our conversation." What Jonathan Whitfield offered me that night wasn't just a job, it was a complete transformation of my life's trajectory. As we sat in his office, the Seattle skyline glittering beyond the windows, he laid out a proposition that took my breath away. "Marcus, I'm not just offering you a position in our finance department. I'm offering you the role of Chief Financial Officer." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "Mr. Whitfield, I appreciate the gesture, but I don't have the experience for—" "Stop," he interrupted. "Today, you demonstrated something that no MBA program can teach and no resume can capture. You showed integrity, analytical brilliance, and the courage to speak truth to power. Do you know how rare that combination is in corporate America?" The offer was staggering. A base salary of $800,000, stock options that could be worth millions, and immediate enrollment in an executive MBA program at Stanford. But more than the money, it was the recognition that my skills had value, that my voice mattered, that I could contribute at the highest levels of American business. "There's one condition," Whitfield continued. "I want you to completely overhaul our financial review processes. What happened today can never happen again. I need someone who understands both the technical aspects of finance and the human elements that lead to these kinds of mistakes." Over the following months, I implemented a revolutionary new system of financial checks and balances at Meridian. We created redundant review processes, cross-cultural teams that brought different perspectives to problem-solving, and a culture where questioning authority was not just accepted but encouraged. The Chen protocol, as it became known in the industry, was eventually adopted by dozens of Fortune 500 companies. But perhaps the most shocking part of Whitfield's offer wasn't the money or the title, it was what he did for my colleagues in the cafeteria. He established a program to identify and develop talent throughout the company, regardless of their current position. Maria received a full scholarship to study business administration and now runs our Latin American operations. James became our head of IT security after we discovered his natural talent for cybersecurity. Susan was promoted to head of corporate hospitality and now manages catering for all of Meridian's global offices. 1 year later, I stood on the same stage where Whitfield had planned to announce the disastrous merger, this time presenting Meridian's most profitable quarter in company history. The audience included financial analysts, investors, and business journalists from around the world, all interested in the story of the cook who saved a billion-dollar company. As I looked out at the crowd, I spotted familiar faces from the cafeteria staff, now dressed in business attire and occupying positions throughout the company. The transformation hadn't just changed my life, it had created a ripple effect that touched dozens of families and challenged the entire corporate culture at Meridian. The most shocking part of this story isn't that a cook spotted a $100 million mistake, or that a CEO was willing to promote someone from the cafeteria to the C-suite. It's that this kind of talent exists everywhere, in every organization, often hidden in plain sight. The real revelation was that success isn't about where you start, it's about having the courage to act when the moment demands it, and working for leaders who recognize that brilliance can emerge from the most unexpected places. Today, as I write this from my corner office on the 47th floor, I keep a small reminder on my desk. The plastic name tag I wore as a cafeteria worker, bearing the simple inscription, Marcus, kitchen staff. It reminds me that extraordinary opportunities often come disguised as ordinary moments, and that the most important ingredient in any recipe for success is the willingness to speak up when it matters most. That $100 million mistake taught me that in business, as in life, the most shocking transformations often begin with the simplest act of courage: telling the truth. To support the channel, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you so much.